Part 6. Next morning, all were early awake, and the children sprang about the trees like little monkeys. "What shall we begin to do, Father?" they cried. "What do you want us to do today?" "Rest, my boys," I replied. "Rest." "Rest?" repeated they. "Why should we rest? 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thou hast to do, but on the seventh thou shalt do no manner of work." "This is the seventh day," I replied. "On it, therefore, let us rest." "What? Is it really Sunday?" said Jack. "How jolly! Oh, I won't do any work, but I'll take a bow and an arrow and shoot, and we'll climb about the trees and have fun all day." "That is not resting," said I. "That is not the way you are accustomed to spend the Lord's day." "No, but then we can't go to church here, and there is nothing else to do." "We can worship here as well as at home," said I. "But there's no church, no clergyman, no organ," said Franz. "The leafy shade of this great tree is far more beautiful than any church," I said. There, we will worship our Creator. Come, boys, down with you. Turn the dining hall into a breakfast room." The children, one by one, slipped down the ladder. "My dear Elizabeth," said I, "this morning we will devote to the service of the Lord, and by means of the parable I will endeavor to give the children some serious thought. But without books, or the possibility of any, or the usual Sunday occupations, we cannot keep them quiet the whole day. Afterwards, therefore, I shall allow them to pursue the innocent recreation they choose, and in the cool of the evening we will take a walk." My wife entirely agreed with my proposal, and having breakfast, the family assembled around me, as we sat in the pleasant shade on the soft grass. After singing some hymns and offering heartfelt prayers to the Almighty Giver of all good, I told the children I would relate to them a parable instead of preaching a sermon. "Oh, that would be delightful. I like parables in the Bible better than anything," said Franz. "When can we hear you read out of the Bible again, Father?" "Oh, my little boy, your words reproach me," returned I. "While eagerly striving to procure from the ship would feed our bodies and provide for their comfort, I blush to think that I have neglected the bread of life, the Word of God. I shall search for a Bible on my next return to the wreck. Although our own books were nearly all destroyed, I am pretty sure to find one." At these words my wife arose, and fetching her magic bag, she drew from it a copy of the Holy Scriptures, which I thankfully received from her hand, and after reading aloud from its sacred pages, I spoke as follows: "A great king, ruling in power and splendor over the vast realm of light and love, possessed within its boundaries a desolate and unfruitful island. The spot he made the object of his special care, and lavishingly on it all the varied resources of the might and goodness. It bloomed in beauty and became a happy residence of a band of colonists, who were charged not only with the cultivation and improvement of the soil, but each individually was bound to cherish in his soul and spirit of love and true allegiance to his sovereign. While this faithful union was maintained, the colony flourished, and the noblest virtues exalted and rendered happy the existence of every member of the race. That a discontented and rebellious spirit should never have infected these fortunate subjects of so loving a master seemed credible, yet it was so. Disobedience and pride brought misery and punishment. The fair prospects of the colony were blighted, the labors of our colonists were unblessed, and total separation from the parent kingdom seemed inevitable. A message of pardon, or free forgiveness, was nevertheless accorded to these rebels, and to all who humbly accepted it, molded their future lives on the will of the great king, now revealed in a character even more gracious than before. Was held out the promise of removal at last from among the ruins caused by the great rebellion, to the glory and the undimmed splendor of the realm of light and blessedness. Having interested the children, I then, leaving allegory, pressed simply and earnestly home to each young heart the truths I sought to teach, and with a short prayer for a blessing of my words, brought the service to a close. After a thoughtful pause, we separated, and each employed himself as he felt disposed. I took some arrows and endeavored to point them with porcupine quills. Franz came to beg me Franz came to beg me make a little bow and arrow for him to shoot with, while Franz asked my advice about the tiger cat skin and the case he was to contrive from it. Jack assisted with the arrow making and inserted a sharp spine at one end of each reed, made it fast with pack thread, and began to wish for glue to ensue his remaining film. "Oh, Jack, Mamma's soup is as sticky as anything," cried Franz. "Shall I run and ask for a cake of it?" "No, no, little goose. Better look for some real glue in the toolbox." There, there he will find glue, to be sure," said I. "But the soup would scarcely have answered your purpose. But, Jack, my boy, I do not like to hear you ridicule your little brother's idea. Some of the most valuable discoveries have been the result of thoughts which originally appeared no wiser than his." While thus directing and assisting my sons, we were surprised by hearing a shot just over our heads. At the same moment 2 birds fell dead at our feet, and looking up, we beheld Ernest among the branches, as bending his face joyfully towards us, he cried, "Well hit, well hit! A good shot, wasn't it?" Then slipping down the ladder and picking up the birds, he brought them to me. One was a kind of a thrush, the other a small dove called an ortolan, and esteemed a very great delicacy on account of its exquisite flavor. As the figs on which these birds came to feed were only just beginning to ripen, it was probable that they would soon flock in numbers to our trees, and by waiting until we could produce them in large quantities, we might provide ourselves with valuable food for the rainy season, by placing them, when half cooked, in casks with melted lard or butter poured over them. By this time Jack had pointed a good supply of arrows and industriously practiced archery. I finished the bow and arrows for Franz and expected to be left in peace, but the young man next demanded a quiver, and I had to invent that also. To complete his equipment, I was easily done by stripping a piece of bark from a small tree, fitting a flat side and a bottom to it, and then a string. Attaching it to his shoulders, the youthful hunter filled it with arrows and went off, looking, as his mother said, like an innocent little Cupid bent on conquest. Not long after this, we were summoned to dinner, and all right willingly obeyed the call. During the meal, I interested the boys very much by proposing to decide on suitable names for the different spots we had visited on our coast. "For," said I, "it will become more and more troublesome to explain what we mean, unless we do so. Beside which, we shall feel much more at home if we can talk as people do in inhabited countries, instead of saying, for instance, the little island at the mouth of our bay, where we found the dead shark, the large stream near our tent, across which we made the bridge, that wood where we found the coconuts and caught the monkey, and so on and so on. Let us begin by naming the bay in which we landed. What shall we call it?" "Oyster Bay," said Fritz. "No, no, Lobster Bay," cried Jack, in memory of the old fellow who took a fancy to my leg. "I think," observed his mother, "that in token of gratitude for our escape, we shall call it Safety Bay." This name met with general approbation and was forthwith fixed upon. Other names were quickly chosen. Our first place of abode we called Tenthloam, the inlet of the bay, Shark Island, and the reedy swamp Flamingo Marsh. It was time before the serious question of the name of our own leafy castle could be decided, but finally it was entitled Falconhurst. And then we rapidly named the few remaining points: Prospect Hill, the eminence we had first ascended; Cape Disappointment, from whose rocky heights we had strained our eyes in vain search for our ship's company; and Jackal River as a name for the large stream at our landing place, concluded our geographical nomenclature. In the afternoon, the boys went on with their various employments. Fritz finished his cases, and Jack asked for my assistance in carrying out his plan of making a cuirass for Turk out of the porcupine skin. After thoroughly cleansing the inside, we cut and fitted it around the body of the patient dog. Then the strings were sewn on, and it became tolerably dry. He was armed with the ingenious coat of mail, and a most singular figure he cut. Juno strongly objected to his friendly approaches, and got out of his way so fast as she could, that it was clear that he would easily put to flight the fiercest animal he might encounter. While protected by armor at once defensive and offensive, I determined to make also a helmet for Jack out of the remainder of the skin, which to his infinite delight I speedily did. Amid these interesting occupations, the evening drew on, and after a pleasant walk among the sweet glades near our abode, we closed our Sabbath day with prayer and a glad hymn of praise, retiring to rest with peaceful hearts. Next morning I proposed an expedition to Tentholm, saying I wished to make my way thither by the different route. We left the tree well armed. I and my 3 elder sons each carried a gun and a game bag, while little Franz was equipped with his bow and quiver full of arrows. A most curious party we formed. Fritz adorned with his belt of margay skin, and Jack with extraordinary headdress, looked like a couple of young savages. Their mother and I walked together. She, of the whole party, being the only one unarmed, carried a jar in which to get butter from Tentholm. We were preceded by the dogs, Turk armed most effectively with his cuirass of porcupine skin, and Juno keeping at a respectful distance from the so formidable a companion. Master Nips fully intended to mount his charger as usual, but then he saw him arrayed apparently in a new skin. He approached him carefully, and touching him with one paw, discovered that such a hide would make anything but an agreeable seat. The grimace he made was most comical, and chattering vociferously, he bounded towards Juno, skipped to her back, and seated himself, and soon appeared perfectly reconciled to the change of the steed. The flamenco saw us starting, and having been much petted during the last day or two, considered himself entitled to accompany us. For some time he kept beside the children, following first one and then the other. As they explored the wood on either side, their irregular course, however, at length disguised him, and abandoning them, he walked sedately by my side. We strolled on in the cool evening air, following the course of the stream. My boys roamed ahead of me, intent on exploration. Presently I heard a joyful shout, and saw Ernest running at full speed towards me, followed by his brothers. In his hand he held a plant, and panting for breath, and with sparkling eyes, he held it up to me. Potatoes, potatoes, father, he gasped out. Yes, said Jack, acres and acres of potatoes. My dearest Ernest, said I, for there was no mistaking the flower and leaf, and the light, clear green, bulbous roots. You have indeed made a discovery. With the potato we shall never starve. But come and look at them, said Jack. Come and feast your eyes on thousands of potatoes. We hurried to the spot. There, spread out before us, was a great tract of ground covered with the precious plant. It would have been rather difficult, remarked Jack, not to have discovered such a great field. Very likely, repeated Ernest, smiling, but I doubt if you would have discovered that that it was a potato field. Perhaps not, said Jack. You are quite welcome, at all events, to the honor of the discovery. I have the honor of being the first to get a supply of them. So saying, he dug up with hands and knife a number of plants, and filled his game bag with roots. The monkey followed his example, and scratching away with his paws most cleverly, soon had a heap beside him. So delighted were we with the discovery that so eager were we to possess a large supply of the roots that we stopped not digging until every bag, pouch, and pocket was filled. Some wished to return at once to Falconhurst to cook and taste our new acquisition, but this I overruled, and we continued our march, heavily laden, but delighted. How, said I, can we thank the giver of all these blessings sufficiently? Oh, said Franz, we can say, we thank thee, O Lord, for all thy goodness and mercy, and bless us Jesus Christ's sake, amen. That would not be sufficient, said Fritz. Do you think it would be enough just to say to father and mother, thank you for all you do, and not to show that we are really thankful by loving them and doing what we can to please them? You are right, Fritz. Franz did not say all that was necessary. He should have added, given my grace to do thy will and to obey thee in all things. As we thus talked, we reached the head of the streamlet, where it fell from the rocks above in a beautiful, sparkling, splashing cascade. We crossed and entered the tall grass on the other side. We forced our way through with difficulty, so thick and tangled were the reeds. Beyond this, the landscape was most lovely. Rich tropical vegetation flourished on every side. The tall, stately palms, surrounded by luxuriant ferns, brilliant flowers, and graceful creepers. The prickly cactus shooting up amidst them, aloe, jasmine, and sweet-scented vanilla. The Indian pea, and above all the regal pineapple, loaded the breath of the evening breeze with such rich perfume. The boys were delighted with the pineapple, and so eagerly did they fall to, that my wife had to caution them that they were no doctors on the territory, and that if they may become ill, they would have to cure themselves as best they might. This advice, however, seemed to have small effect on my sons, and showing Nips what they wanted, they sent him up for the ripest and best fruit. While they were thus employed, I examined the other shrubs and bushes. Among these I presently noticed one which I knew well from description to be the Caratus. Come here, boys, I said. Here is something of far more value than your pineapples. Do you see the plant with the long pointed leaves and beautiful red flower? That is a caratus. The filaments of the leaves make capital thread, while the leaves themselves, bruised, form an invaluable salve. The pitch of this wonderful plant may be used either for tinder or bait for fish. Suppose, Ernest, you had been wrecked here. How would you have made a fire without matches, or flint, or steel? As the savages do, replied he. I would rub two pieces of wood together until they kindled. Try it, I said. But if you please, try it when you have made a whole day before you, and no other work to be done, for I am certain it would be night before you accomplish the feat. But see here, and I broke a dry twig from the caratus, and peeling off the bark, laid the pith upon a stone. I struck a couple of pebbles over it, and they emitted a spark, and pith caught fire. The boys were delighted with the experiment, and I drew some of the threads from the leaves and presented them to my wife. But what, said Fritz, is the use of all these other prickly plants except to annoy one? Here, for instance, is a disagreeable little tree. That is an Indian fig, said I. It grows best on dry, rocky ground, for most of its nourishment is derived from the air. Its juice is used, I believe, medicinally, while its fruit is pleasant and wholesome. Master Jack was often a moment when he heard of the new delicacy, and attempted to gather some of the fruit, but in vain. The sharp thorns defied his efforts, and with bleeding hands and rueful countenance he returned. I removed the thorns from his hands, and making a sharp wooden skewer, I thrust it into a fig, and quickly twisted it from its branch, and spit it open with a knife. Still holding it upon a skewer, the rest followed by example, and we regaled ourselves upon the fruit, which we found excellent. Ernest carefully examined the fig he was eating. "What?" he exclaimed presently. "Are these little red insects? They cling all over to the fruit. I cannot shake them off. Can they be cochineals?" He handed me the fig, and I examined it attentively. "You're quite right, my boy," I said. "There is no doubt this is the real cochineal. However, though it is worth its weight in gold to European traders, it is of little use to us. I am afraid, unless any of you to appear in gay colors, the cochineal, you know, forms the most lovely scarlet dye." "No, thank you," said Jack, "but we will take a lot of it when we go home again. Now let us find something more useful to us." And they thereupon plied me incessantly with questions concerning every plant and shrub we passed. "Stop, stop," I said at length. "The most learned naturalist would be much puzzled with many of these trees, and I, who have never seen any of them before, and know merely by description, cannot pretend to tell you the names or explain to you the use of one quarter of them." Discussing, however, the properties of such shrubs as I did know, we at length reached Tentholm. Everything was safe, and we set to work to collect what we wanted. I opened the butter cask from which my wife filled her pot. Fritz saw after the ammunition, and Jack and Ernest ran down to the beach to capture geese and ducks. This was why no easy matter. This they found no easy matter, for the birds, left so long alone, were shy, and nothing would induce them to come on shore or be caught. Ernest at length hit upon an ingenious plan. He took some pieces of cheese and tied them to long strings. This bait he threw into the water, and the hungry ducks instantly made a grab at it. With a little skilful maneuvering, he drew them on shore. While Jack and he were thus busily employing catching and trying the rebels together by their feet, we procured a fresh supply of salt, which we packed upon Turk's back. First relieving him of his coat and mail, the birds we fastened to our game bags, and carefully closing the door to our tent, started homewards by the seashore. After a cheerful and pleasant walk, we once more reached our woodland abode. I released the birds, and clipping their wings to prevent them leaving us, established them on the stream. Then, after a delicious supper of potatoes, milk, and butter, we ascended our tree and turned in. Having remarked a great deal of driftwood on the sands the preceding evening, it occurred to me that it would be well to get some of it and make some kind of sledge, so that the labor of fetching what we wanted from our stores from Tentholm might not fall so heavily on ourselves. I awoke early, and roused Ernest as my assistant, wishing to encourage him to overcome his natural fault of indolence. After a little sketching and yawning, he got up cheerfully, pleased with the idea of an expedition while the others still slept, and we made our way to the beach, taking with us the donkey, who drew a large broad bow, which I expected to find useful in bringing back our load. As we went along, I remarked to Ernest that I supposed he was rather sorry for himself, and grudged leaving his cozy hammock and pleasant dreams as his ultimate hour. "Oh, father, do not laugh at my laziness. Indeed, I mean to cure myself of it. I am very glad to go with you. I intend to shoot some more of the ortolans this morning, but there will be plenty of time afterwards. The boys will be shooting at them, I dare say, but I don't expect they will have any great luck." "Why not, pray?" inquired I. "I don't believe they will know what shot to use at first, and besides, they will most likely shoot upwards at the birds, and be sure to miss them, on account of the great height and thickness of the branches and foliage." "Well, Ernest, you certainly possess the gift of prudence and reflection as well as observation. These are valuable, but sudden action is so often necessary in life, and I advise you to cultivate the power of instantly perceiving and deciding what must be done in the case of an emergency. Presence of mind is a precious quality, which, although natural in some characters, may be acquired to a certain degree by all who train themselves to it. Once on the seashore, our work was quickly accomplished. For selecting the wood I thought fit for my purpose, we laid it across the broad, leafy branch, and with some help from us, the donkey dragged a very fair load of it homewards, with the addition of a small chest which I raised from among the sand which nearly covered it. We heard the boys popping away at the birds as we drew near. They hastened to meet us, and inquired where we had been. Looking curiously at the chest, which I allowed them to open, while I asked my wife to excuse our absence without leave, and after submitting to her gentle reprimand, I explained my plan for a sledge, which pleased her greatly, and she already imagined it loaded with all her hogshead of butter, and on its way from Tentholm to Falconhurst. The chest proved to be merely that of a common sailor, containing his clothes very much wetted by the sea water. The boys exhibited an array of several dozen birds, and related during breakfast the various incidents of failure and success which had attended their guns. Ernest had rightly guessed the mistakes they would make, but practice was making them perfect, and they seemed disposed to continue their sport. When their mother assured them that she could not use more birds than those already killed, asked if I did not think some means of snarling them might be contrived. As much powder and shot would be expelled if they fired on at this rate. Entirely agreeing with this view of the subject, I desired the lads to lay aside their guns for the present, and the younger ones readily applied themselves to making snares of a long thread drawn from the leaves of the caritas. In a simple way I taught them, while Fritz and Ernest gave me substantial assistance in the manufacture of the new sledge. We were busily at work, with a tremendous disturbance among our fowls led us to suppose that a fox or a wild cat had got into their midst. The cocks crowed defiantly, and the hens fluttered and cackled in a state of wildest excitement. We hastened towards them, but Ernest remarked Master Nips slipping away as though conscious of some misdemeanor. Went to watch him, and presently caught him in the act of eating a new laid egg, which he had carried off and hidden among the grass and roots. Ernest found several others. These were very welcome to my wife, for hitherto the hens had not presented us with any eggs. Hereafter she determined to imprison the monkey every morning until the eggs had been collected. Soon after this, as Jack was setting the newly made snares among the branches, he discovered that a pair of our own pigeons were building in the tree. It was very desirable to increase our stock of these pretty birds, and I cautioned the boys against shooting near our tree while they had nests there, and also with regard to the snares, which were meant only to entrap the wild fig eaters. Although my sons were interested in setting the snares, they by no means approved of the new order to economize our ammunition. No doubt they had been discussing this hardship, for little Franz came to me with a brilliant proposal of his own. "Papa," he said, why should not we begin to plant some powder and shot immediately? It would be so much more useful than bare grain for our fowls." His brother burst into a roar of laughter, and I must confess I found it no easy matter to keep my countenance. "Come, Ernest," said I, "now we have our own amusement. Tell the little fellow what gunpowder really is." "It is not seed at all, Franz," Ernest explained. "Gunpowder is made of charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter, mixed cleverly together. So you see, it cannot be sown like corn, any more than a shot can be planted like peas and beans." My carpentering meantime went on apace. In order to shape my sledge with end properly turned up in front, I had chosen wood which had been part of the bow of the vessel, and was curved in a necessary way for my purpose. Two pieces perfectly similar formed the sides of my sleigh or sledge, and I simply united these strongly by fixing short bars across them. Then, when the ropes of the donkey's harness were attached to the raised points in front, the equipage was complete and ready for use. My attention had been for some time wholly engrossed by my work, and I only now observed that the mother and her little boys had been busily plucking above 2 dozen of the wild birds, and were preparing to roast them, spitted in a row on a long, narrow sword blade belonging to one of our ship's officers. It seemed somewhat wasteful to cook so many at once, but my wife explained that she was getting them ready for the butter cask. I was going to fetch for her on the new sledge, as I advised her to preserve them half cooked and packed in butter. Amused at her promptitude, I could do nothing less than promise to go for her cask directly after dinner. For her part, she resolved, in our absence, to have a grand wash of linen and other clothes, and she advised me to arrange regular baths for all the boys in the future. Early in the afternoon, Ernest and I, ready to be off, friends presented us with each a new case of margay skin to hang on our girdles. We harnessed both cow and ass to the